When my mother found out my girlfriend was black, she lost her mind. I said she was a good person and skin color didn't matter, but Mom yelled, "How can you do this in our house? Get out and never come back." So I left. 5 years later, after I made it on my own, my phone exploded with calls. It was my mother saying, "Alex, I need your help. We are still family." So here's my story, and man, I never thought I'd be sharing this on Reddit, but here we are. My name's Alex. I'm 24, and I never imagined that the biggest tragedy of my life would happen right at home, in the place where I was supposed to feel safest. Let me paint you a picture of my mom. She's always been this super conservative woman. You know the type, church every Sunday, obsessed with what the neighbors think, constantly worried about our family's reputation in our small Ohio town. She's the kind of person who judges people by their lawn maintenance and gets personally offended when someone parks slightly crooked in front of our house. I thought I knew her pretty well, but boy was I wrong about how deep that conservatism ran. Everything changed when I started dating Leah. Leah is this amazing girl I met at college, smart, funny, studying to be a nurse, and she happens to be black. Now, I know what you're thinking, and yeah, in 2019 you'd think this wouldn't be a big deal anymore, right? Wrong. At least not in my house. I'd been seeing Leah for about 6 months when I finally decided to bring her home for dinner. Looking back, maybe I should have prepared my mom better, but honestly, I didn't think it would be that big of a deal. We're talking about a woman who watches Ellen DeGeneres and claims she's not prejudiced, you know? I figured she might be a little awkward at first, but I never expected what actually happened. The moment Leah walked through that front door, I could see my mom's face change. It wasn't subtle either. Her smile just completely froze, like someone had hit the pause button on her face. She went through the motions of being polite during dinner, but I could feel the tension so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Leah noticed it too, but she's classier than me and just kept trying to make conversation about her nursing program and her family. After Leah left that night, all hell broke loose. Mom waited exactly 30 seconds after I closed the door before she started on me. She was pacing around our living room like a caged animal, her face getting redder by the minute. The things she started saying, man, I can't even repeat most of them without getting this post flagged. But the gist was pretty clear. She was absolutely furious that I was dating someone who didn't look like us. What really got me was how she kept talking about our family reputation and what people at church would think. She kept going on about how I was embarrassing our family name and how her friends would never let her live it down. It was like she cared more about some imaginary gossip than about my actual happiness. She even had the nerve to suggest that I was just going through a rebellious phase, like dating someone I cared about was equivalent to getting a face tattoo or something. I tried explaining to her that Leah was an incredible person, that she made me happy. That race literally meant nothing to me when it came to love. I told her about Leah's family. Her dad's a veteran who served 2 tours in Afghanistan. Her mom teaches elementary school. Her brother's studying engineering at MIT. I mean, these are exactly the kind of people my mom usually respects, right? But none of that mattered. Mom just kept getting more worked up, talking about how I was throwing away my future and how no good could come from this relationship. She started bringing up all these worst-case scenarios, like we were living in some kind of 1950s movie. It was honestly heartbreaking to see someone I looked up to my whole life reveal this ugly side I never knew existed. The final straw came when she gave me an ultimatum. She told me I had to choose, either break up with Leah and find someone more appropriate, or I could pack my bags and leave her house. She actually said I needed to figure out who I really was. Like being in love with someone with some kind of identity crisis I needed to work through. I stood there in our kitchen, looking at this woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me to treat everyone with respect and kindness, and I realized I didn't recognize her anymore. The hypocrisy was mind-blowing. Here was someone who'd always preached about Christian values and loving your neighbor, but apparently that only applied when your neighbor looked exactly like you. So I made my choice. I went upstairs, packed everything that mattered to me into 2 duffel bags and my old backpack from high school. I grabbed my laptop, some clothes, a few photos, and the watch my grandpa left me. It's crazy how your entire life can fit into so little space when you really think about what's actually important. Walking out That front door was one of the hardest things I've ever done. My mom stood there watching me leave, probably expecting me to change my mind at the last second and come crawling back. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't abandon someone I loved just to make my mom feel better about her own prejudices. As I drove away from the only home I'd ever known, with nowhere to go and about $300 in my checking account, I had no idea that this moment would end up being the best thing that ever happened to me. But that's getting ahead of myself. At the time, I just felt like my world was falling apart. Little did I know that leaving that house was going to set me on a path that would change everything about my life. Sometimes the worst moments end up being the beginning of something amazing, but you can't see it when you're right in the middle of the storm. So there I was, homeless at 19 with basically nothing but a computer science degree and a girlfriend who believed in me more than I believed in myself. Leah let me crash at her tiny studio apartment. And man, living in a space that's small with another person really tests your relationship. But somehow we made it work. I had to get creative fast about making money. I started taking every freelance coding job I could find on websites like Upwork and Fiverr. We're talking about building websites for mom-and-pop shops, fixing broken WordPress sites, and creating basic mobile apps for small businesses. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and kept me fed on a steady diet of ramen noodles and gas station coffee. But here's where things get interesting. While I was doing all these random coding jobs, I kept noticing the same problem over and over again. Small businesses, especially restaurants and retail shops, were struggling with inventory management. They either had too much stuff sitting around collecting dust, or they'd run out of popular items right when customers wanted them most. I remember this one pizza shop owner who hired me to fix his point-of-sale system. This guy was literally keeping track of his inventory on sticky notes stuck to his office wall. Sticky notes. In 2020, he was constantly running out of pepperoni on Friday nights or ordering way too much mushrooms that would go bad before anyone wanted mushroom pizza. It was like watching someone try to fly a plane with a paper map and a compass. That's when the light bulb went off. What if there was a simple, affordable way for small businesses to predict exactly what they needed and when they needed it? Not some complicated enterprise software that costs $50,000 and requires a PhD to operate, but something actually designed for regular people who just want to run their business without constantly guessing. I started working on this idea in my spare time, which wasn't much since I was still hustling for freelance work to keep us afloat. Leah would come home from her nursing clinicals to find me surrounded by empty energy drink cans and scratch paper covered in algorithms. She'd just shake her head, make me a proper meal, and remind me to shower occasionally. That woman was my anchor during those crazy months. The first version of what I called StockSmart was basically held together with digital duct tape and prayers. It looked like something a high school student might build for a computer class project. But it worked. It analyzed sales patterns, tracked seasonal trends, and gave small business owners simple recommendations about what to order and when. I convinced that pizza shop owner to be my guinea pig. Within 2 months, he'd reduced his food waste by 40% and never ran out of pepperoni again. He was so happy he started telling every other business owner in town about my little app. Word of mouth in small towns moves faster than wildfire, let me tell you. By the end of my first year of being basically homeless, I had about 20 small businesses using StockSmart. I was charging them $50 a month, which doesn't sound like much, but when you're living on ramen and hope, $1,000 monthly recurring revenue feels like winning the lottery. Leah and I finally moved into a real one-bedroom apartment instead of her shoebox studio. That's when I decided to go all in. I stopped taking freelance work and focused entirely on StockSmart. It was terrifying because it meant our entire income depended on this one idea working out. But Leah supported me completely, even though it meant she had to pick up extra shifts at the hospital where she was doing her practical training. I spent the next year improving the software, adding features, and slowly growing my customer base. I learned about marketing, customer service, and business operations through YouTube videos and free online courses. It was like getting an MBA from the University of Google, and my classroom was our tiny living room. The breakthrough came when I applied for a small business competition at the local university. I didn't expect much, but the prize was $10,000 and some mentorship from actual successful entrepreneurs. My presentation was basically me standing up there talking about pizza shop inventory management, but apparently the judges saw something in it. Not only did I win first place, but one of the judges was a venture capitalist from Chicago who specialized in small business software. He approached me after the ceremony and asked if I'd ever considered scaling StockSmart beyond just local businesses. That conversation changed everything. 2 months later, I found myself sitting in a conference room in downtown Chicago, wearing my first real business suit that Leah had helped me pick out, presenting to a room full of investors. They asked me questions I'd never thought about, like addressable market size and customer acquisition costs. I felt like I was speaking a foreign language, but somehow I convinced them that StockSmart could help thousands of small businesses across the country. They offered me $50,000 for a 20% stake in my company. $50,000. I tried to play it cool in the meeting, but inside, I was doing mental backflips. This was more money than my family had ever had at one time. I signed those papers so fast, I probably broke the sound barrier. The best part wasn't even the money, though that was pretty amazing. It was calling Leah and hearing her scream with joy over phone. She believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself, and now it was actually paying off. We went out to our first fancy dinner ever that night, and I still remember how proud she looked sitting across from me in that restaurant. For the first time since leaving my mom's house, I felt like I was actually building something meaningful with my life. Fast forward 5 years. StockSmart had grown beyond my wildest dreams. We were serving over 2,000 small businesses across 15 states. I had 12 employees, and my company was valued at just over $3 million. Leah and I had gotten married in a small ceremony that her family helped pay for, and we bought our first house. Nothing crazy fancy, just a nice 3-bedroom place with a 2-car garage and a yard where we could maybe raise kids someday. Life was good, really good. I'd almost forgotten about the drama with my mom. Honestly, every now and then I'd think about reaching out, but then I'd remember how she'd made me choose between her and the woman I loved, and the anger would come flooding back. Leah would sometimes suggest that maybe we should try to rebuild that relationship, but I wasn't ready. Some wounds take a long time to heal, you know? Then, on a random Tuesday morning in March, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in 5 years. My mom's number. I stared at that screen for probably 10 rings before I finally answered. Her voice sounded different. Smaller somehow, less sure of herself than I remembered. The conversation was awkward as heck at first. She asked how I was doing, made some small talk about the weather, asked if I was still in tech. I kept my answers short because, honestly, I didn't know what game she was playing. Then she dropped the bomb she'd obviously been building up to. She needed my help. Financial help. Big time. Apparently, after I left, she'd gotten involved in some kind of multi-level marketing scheme selling essential oils and health supplements. You know the type. Those pyramid schemes that convince middle-aged women they're going to become millionaire entrepreneurs by annoying their Facebook friends into buying overpriced lavender oil. But my mom had gone deeper than most people. She'd taken out a second mortgage on the house to buy inventory. She'd maxed out credit cards to attend training seminars and buy more product. She'd even borrowed money from friends and family members, promising them huge returns when her business took off. Of course, it never took off. Those schemes are designed to make money for the people at the top, not the regular folks who get suckered into thinking they're going to get rich quick. After 3 years of throwing good money after bad, she was facing foreclosure on the house, had about $60,000 in credit card debt, and owed money to half the people in her church. The kicker? She was also dealing with some health issues that made it hard for her to work a regular job. Nothing life-threatening, but chronic back problems that meant she couldn't stand for long periods or do physical labor. So she was basically stuck with no income, mounting debts, and a house she was about to lose. I have to admit, part of me felt vindicated hearing all this. Here was a woman who'd kicked me out for dating someone she didn't approve of, and now she was calling me because she needed the success I'd built without her help. There was definitely a petty part of me that wanted to ask her how those essential oils were working out for her. But mostly I just felt sad. This was my mom, you know? The woman who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd stayed up all night, when I had pneumonia in third grade, who'd driven me to every baseball practice, even when money was tight. Seeing her brought so low was harder than I'd expected it to be. She tried to maintain some dignity during that phone call, but I could hear the desperation underneath. She kept emphasizing that she wasn't asking for a handout, that she'd pay me back as soon as she got back on her feet. She talked about maybe getting a job at Walmart or something once her back felt better. It was heartbreaking, honestly. I told her I needed to think about it and talk to Leah. She gave me her new address. Apparently she was staying in some kind of extended stay motel because she couldn't afford rent anywhere else. A motel. My mom, who used to judge people for shopping at discount stores, was living in a weekly rate motel. That night, Leah and I had a long conversation about what to do. She reminded me that forgiveness isn't really about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from carrying around anger and resentment. She also pointed out that we were in a position to help, and that maybe this was an opportunity for my mom to learn and grow from her mistakes. But I was conflicted. On one hand, she was family, and she was clearly in a desperate situation. On the other hand, she'd shown her true colors 5 years ago, and I wasn't sure helping her financially would actually teach her anything or just enable more bad decisions. I decided to drive down and meet with her in person. I needed to see for myself what was really going on before I made any decisions about helping her out. Plus, if I was being honest with myself, there was a part of me that wanted her to see how well I'd done for myself. Not to rub it in her face exactly, but maybe to make her realize that kicking me out had been the biggest mistake she'd ever made. The drive to her motel took about 2 hours, and I spent the whole time rehearsing what I was going to say. I wanted to be compassionate, but also protect myself from getting manipulated. I'd worked too hard to build my life to let anyone, even my own mother, mess it up with their poor choices. When I pulled into that motel parking lot and saw her walking toward my car, I barely recognized her. She looked older, more tired, and there was something defeated in the way she carried herself. This wasn't the confident, judgmental woman who'd kicked me out 5 years ago. This was someone who'd been humbled by life in a way I'd never seen before. Meeting my mom at that dingy motel was like stepping into an alternate reality. The woman who used to obsess over keeping our house spotless was living in a room that smelled like industrial disinfectant and old cigarettes. She'd aged more in 5 years than she should have in 10, and there was this desperate energy about her that made me uncomfortable. She immediately started with the waterworks. I mean, full-on sobbing about how sorry she was, how she'd made terrible mistakes, how she missed me every single day. She kept talking about how proud she was of what I'd accomplished, how she'd heard through mutual acquaintances that I was doing well in business. It felt rehearsed, like she'd been practicing this speech for weeks. Then came the guilt trips. She started talking about how she was getting older, how she didn't have anyone else to turn to, how family should stick together no matter what. She kept emphasizing that she'd learned her lesson about judging people, that she'd grown as a person and realized how wrong she'd been about Leah and our relationship. But here's the thing. Something felt off about the whole performance. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure she was genuinely struggling financially, but there were little details that didn't add up. Like, she was wearing new-looking shoes and had obviously gotten her hair done recently. Her nails were professionally manicured. For someone who was supposedly broke and living in a motel, she was maintaining her appearance pretty well. She kept pushing me to make a decision right there in that motel room. She had all these papers spread out on the bed, foreclosure notices, credit card statements, medical bills. She wanted me to see exactly how much debt she was in and how urgent her situation was. $63,000 total, not counting the mortgage she was behind on. The pressure tactics were getting pretty obvious at this point. She started talking about how quickly I could solve all her problems, how it would barely make a dent in my success, how it would give her a fresh start to rebuild her life. She even suggested that helping her would be good karma, that it would come back to me somehow. I told her I needed some time to process everything and make a decision with Leah. She didn't like that answer at all. She got this frustrated look on her face and started talking about how time-sensitive everything was, how the bank was going to foreclose any day now, how she might end up homeless if I didn't act quickly. That's when I decided to do some investigating on my own. Call it paranoia or just good business sense. But something about her story wasn't sitting right with me. I had a friend who worked in private investigation, and I asked him to do a quick background check on my mom's financial situation. What he found was eye-opening, to put it mildly. First off, she wasn't actually facing immediate foreclosure. She was behind on her mortgage payments, but she had at least 6 months before the bank would even start the legal process. So all that urgency about needing money immediately was basically manufactured pressure. But that was just the beginning. It turns out she'd been telling different stories to different people about her financial problems. She'd told her sister that she needed money for medical bills, told her best friend that she was behind on utilities, and told her neighbor that she needed help with car repairs. Everyone had a different version of why she was in trouble. The really sketchy part was what my investigator found about her recent spending. Despite claiming to be broke, she'd been making regular payments to a local casino. We're talking about significant amounts too, hundreds of dollars multiple times per month. She'd also been buying expensive skincare products and had even taken a weekend trip to Las Vegas just 2 months before calling me for help. It started to become clear that my mom hadn't just fallen victim to a multi-level marketing scheme. She developed a gambling problem on top of her business failures, and instead of dealing with it honestly, she was trying to manipulate family members into funding her addiction. I also discovered that the essential oil business had actually been shut down over a year ago, but she'd been telling people she was still trying to make it work. In reality, she'd been living off credit cards and small loans from friends while spending her time at the local casino, probably chasing the big win that would solve all her problems. The medical issues were real, but they weren't preventing her from working like she claimed. Her doctor had cleared her for light-duty work months ago, but she'd been turning down job opportunities because they didn't pay enough or weren't prestigious enough for her liking. Apparently, she'd rather manipulate people for money than work a regular job like everyone else. When I confronted her about some of these inconsistencies, she got defensive fast. She started making excuses about how the gambling was just a way to relax and unwind, how she'd only been trying to win money to pay her bills. She claimed the trip to Vegas had been paid for by a friend, and the skincare products were necessities because she needed to look professional for job interviews. But the most telling moment came when I asked her directly about her attitude toward Leah and our marriage. I wanted to know if she'd really changed her views, or if she was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. Her response was all generic platitudes about learning to accept people for who they are, but when I pressed for specifics, she couldn't give me any real examples of how her thinking had evolved. It became obvious that she was telling me what she thought would get me to open my wallet, not expressing genuine remorse or growth. She was still the same judgmental, manipulative person who'd kicked me out 5 years ago. She was just desperate enough now to pretend otherwise. That night, I sat in my car outside that motel for probably an hour, trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me wanted to just drive away and never look back. She'd made her choices, and now she was dealing with the consequences. Why should I bail out someone who'd shown me no loyalty when I needed her support? But another part of me recognized that this was a moment that would define who I was as a person. Did I want to be someone who turned his back on family, even when they'd wronged me? Or was there a way to help that didn't involve enabling her destructive behavior? I was about to find out if there was a third option that nobody had considered yet. After discovering the truth about my mom's gambling problem and manipulation tactics, I knew I had to approach the situation differently than she expected. I wasn't going to be another enabler in her life, but I also wasn't going to abandon family completely. What I came up with was probably the most strategic decision I've ever made. I called her the next morning and told her I'd help, but with very specific conditions. I would pay off her most critical debts, the ones that would actually result in immediate consequences like foreclosure or utility shutoffs. But I wasn't going to give her a lump sum of cash that she could blow at the casino in a weekend. Instead, I hired a financial advisor to work with her and set up a structured payment plan. Every dollar I spent on her behalf went directly to creditors, never through her hands. I paid the back mortgage payments to bring her current, settled the credit card debts for about 60 cents on the dollar, and caught up her utilities. Total damage? About $40,000, which honestly wasn't going to break me. But here's where it gets interesting. I also bought her house, not as a gift, as an investment property that I now own outright. She could continue living there, but she was now essentially my tenant, paying me a reasonable monthly rent that was much lower than market rate. Same thing with her car. I paid off the loan and transferred the title to my name, but let her keep driving it as long as she followed certain rules. The rules were pretty straightforward. No gambling, period. She had to attend Gamblers Anonymous meetings twice a week and provide me with proof of attendance. She had to get a job within 60 days and maintain steady employment. And she had to complete financial counseling to learn how to manage money properly. Most importantly, if she wanted to maintain any relationship with me and potentially meet her future grandchildren, she had to go to therapy to address her prejudices and learn to genuinely accept Leah as part of our family. Not just tolerate her, but actually make an effort to build a relationship. The look on her face when I laid out these terms was priceless. She'd expected me to either write her a check and walk away, or tell her to pound sand. She hadn't anticipated that I'd essentially become her landlord and financial supervisor. You could see her trying to calculate whether this was better or worse than being completely cut off. At first, she tried to negotiate. She wanted me to just give her the house outright, complained that the therapy requirement was insulting, argued that the gambling restrictions were too harsh. But I held firm. This was the deal, take it or leave it. She could accept my help on my terms, or she could figure things out on her own. She took the deal, but she wasn't happy about it. For the first few months, she'd call me constantly to complain about various aspects of our arrangement. The rent was too high. Her job at a local retail store was beneath her. The therapy was a waste of time. It was like listening to a teenager complain about their parents' rules. But slowly, things started to change. The structure I'd imposed was actually helping her get her life back together, even if she resented it. Having to show up for work every day gave her routine and purpose. The gambling addiction counseling was helping her understand the underlying issues that had led to her financial problems. The real breakthrough came about 6 months into our arrangement. She asked if she could invite Leah and me over for dinner. At the house I now technically owned but she lived in, it was surreal. Sitting in my childhood dining room as my mom served us the pot roast she used to make when I was a kid, but with completely different power dynamics than when I was growing up. During that dinner, something remarkable happened. My mom started asking Leah genuine questions about her work as a nurse, about her family, about her interests. Not the polite small talk from 5 years ago, but real conversation. She even laughed at one of Leah's jokes. It wasn't perfect, and you could still sense some awkwardness, but it felt authentic in a way their previous interactions never had. After dinner, my mom pulled me aside and did something I never expected. She apologized. Not the manipulative, self-serving apology from the motel, but a real acknowledgement of how her prejudices had hurt me and damaged our relationship. She admitted that losing me had been the worst consequence of her closed-mindedness, and that she was genuinely trying to change. That's when I realized that my unconventional approach to helping her had worked better than traditional generosity would have. By maintaining control over the situation, I'd force her to actually address her problems instead of just covering them up with money. She was learning to take responsibility for her choices because she had to, not because she wanted to. Thanks for sticking with me through this whole crazy story. I know it's been a wild ride from start to finish. What do you think about how everything turned out? Was I too harsh with the conditions I set for my mom? Or do you think the structure actually helped her more than just giving her money would have? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you at all, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. It really helps me continue sharing these personal stories with all of you. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.